Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
She wants to get home and watch her
I don't want to be
son.
here until 10 o'clock at
It'll
night.
be something, I'm sure. Okay. It being 7 PM, we'll call to order. The Swansea Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting for June 20, 2022. I will ask Beverly to call our roll and read our agenda,
Okay.
please.
Steve Tebow,
Here.
Ann Karasinski,
Here.
Brian Rogers,
Here.
Joe Hutwalker. Not here. Ed Mulhern. Not here. Eric Callio. Here. Wayne Lechleiter,
Here.
Jillian Excel. Is not here. A regular meeting of the Swansea Zoning Board of Adjustment to be held on Monday, June 20th, 2022 at 7 PM at Wickham Hall, 17 Main Street, Swansea. Is as follows. Public may also access the meeting via Zoom by going to www.zoom.us using the Zoom app or by calling 929-205-6099 and entering meeting ID number 235-370-4380. The first order of business will be called to order. The second, minutes of May 16, 2022 will be reviewed. Following that, public hearings. ZBA 22-008, variance application, Fieldstone Land Consultant PLLC on behalf of Edward and Jody Martinez has requested a variance in section 11, Article B1 of the zoning ordinance to replace two non-conforming structures with new structures with additional cubic footage and/or altered footprint at 79 West Shore Road. The subject property is shown at tax map 61 lot 37 and is located in the rural agricultural district. ZBA 22-009 variance application. West Swansea Road Solar Garden LLC has requested a variance pursuant to section 5, Article B1 of the zoning ordinance to construct, install, and operate an approximately 3 megawatt ground-based solar array on property owned by Patrick Putnam Realty Group LLC. The subject property is located at 909 West Swansea Road, shown at tax map 71 lot 13-2 in both the business and rural agricultural districts. ZBA 22-010 special exception application. Thomas Cashman has requested a special exception pursuant to section 3-AA, Article B of the zoning ordinance to construct a detached accessory dwelling unit, DADU, at 29 Swansea Lake Road, owned by Kimberly and Michael Ivy. The subject property is shown at tax map 31, lot 25-2, and is located in the residence district. Other business to be considered. Discussion adopting fees for ZBA applications continued from the previous meeting, and there may be other business as arises that may be required.
Thank you, Beverly.
You're welcome.
As we've had the set of public hearings we have tonight presented to us, we need to now take a vote or make a determination as to whether any of these three hearings could rise to the level of having a regional impact. You've had a while to look at these. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that particular narrow piece of what we have to look at right now before we look at each of these in the larger context. Does anyone have a sense that any of these have a regional impact? Or if not, we can entertain a motion. Anne?
Well, the only one that I would question is the power solar array, if it's whether that is considered an impact, since it would be going out onto the grid into other communities theoretically.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't have an experience with this. I mean, we've never had something with a regional impact, but if one were to have one, this is being distributed on those lines going into other. So I don't know if it's regional or if it's because it's part of the power grid. Maybe it doesn't matter.
I'll let Sarah talk about this, and certainly which is a group discussion, is that, you know, a regional impact, an example might be an excavation where they're excavating sand or gravel, and this has a lot of noise. And that noise may bleed over to someone living in the town next door or
Okay,
thereabouts, or might create a whole lot of truck traffic through a narrow road. So in another town. So those are just a couple of brief examples of how regional impact is. I don't know about what you, power going into a grid. I'm not sure that that's,
I don't
unless it
know.
physically affects
Mhm.
another, potentially another.
I guess it really wouldn't be any different since roads theoretically would be no different than a transmission.
Kind of passive.
Yeah. Okay.
Sarah, any?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the only regional impacts that I've seen have been on excavation permits.
Anyway, right?
Yeah.
Sand, gravel pits and
Mhm.
things of that sort. It could be others, but I think if it's, maybe it affects the senses of another person, smell, sight, sound.
Well, I would make a motion then that none of these applications rise to the level of a regional impact.
Thank you. Second.
Second.
Thanks, Brian. It's been moved and seconded that none of the three hearings we have tonight, or three
Mr.
cases we have
Chairman,
tonight.
point of order, have you seated Mr. Leclider
you.
for Mr.
Thank you.
Heltwell or for Mr. Mulhern?
Yeah, we will seat Wayne for, you have a choice, I guess, but we'll seat you for Bill. You'll be Bill tonight instead of Al.
Okay.
That's a tough,
That's a double pay.
right? Thank you, Beverly.
You're
So
welcome.
Wayne will be seated for Bill. In terms of the regional impact vote, we have a moved and seconded. Any questions on that motion? Any discussion or points of order? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We have some minutes. We have one set of minutes from May 16th. It appears as though we have a quorum of people here that were here that night. We have actually 4 out of the 5 that were here on May 16th. The minutes have been provided to you previously. Anyone care to take a motion on these minutes right now? Before,
I make a motion to accept the minutes.
thank you, Wayne. We have a second?
I'll second.
All right. So it's on the table. Any edits or changes or additions or deletions necessarily, or other changes to this set of minutes that anyone has at this point? Hearing none. We'll take a vote on the minutes from May 16th, 22. All those in favor of the minutes as presented, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Regional impact minutes. Right, you see on the agenda that we need to address this in any way now, or is it informational for the board?
It's there at your request.
Okay, all right, good. We then can move on to the stuff tonight. Our first case before us is ZBA 22-008. It's a variance application, Fieldstone Land Consultants, PLLC, on behalf of Edward and Joni Mosteiner. Hopefully that's correct. Has requested a variance from section 11, article B1 of the zoning ordinance to replace 2 non-conforming structures with new structures with additional cubic footage and or altered footprints at 79 West Shore Road. The subject property shown at tax map 61 lot 37 located in the rural agricultural district. Again, we'll seat Wayne for Bill on this one. I will say this now, and I'll probably say it for all 3 of these applications. We have 4 members seated tonight on the ZBA board. On regular board's 5. As applicants, anyone here could have the ability to defer their application until we can get a full board seated. The primary reason being is you need 3 positive votes on your application in order to prevail. If it's a 2-2 vote, it doesn't pass. You need 3 votes to get a zoning application to pass. So that's something to be thought of. Like, Chad, you can think about it with your folks if necessary. Maybe you already have, but we don't have the full board. So a 2-2 vote means whatever the motion might be, it would fail. So if it's a motion to approve and it's 2-2, it would fail. We certainly have, you have the right to, again, reschedule with us and till we have a full board. I'll remind folks of this before we start. And I guess, Chad, I don't know if you've thought about this or given this any thought going forward, but that is the situation when you have a 4-person board.
Absolutely.
Ready to-
We would like to proceed, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks. Please do so. What do you want to do?
Before he starts,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, does Sarah have anything to tee us up?
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, Chad.
I feel like Chad's presentation is going to cover everything that tell you if it wasn't already in the memo.
All right. Anything you
No
don't
pressure.
highlight or anything else? And you're good to
Yeah.
go?
Yeah.
All right.
Drop the
So
ball.
let me figure out to do that. I think it's really important. So anyway, we're good. Go ahead.
Perfect. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Chad Brannon. I'm a civil engineer with Fieldstone Land Consultants, and I'll be representing Ed and Jody Marsteiner this evening. We are before you this evening requesting 2 variances to reconstruct 2 structures on the subject parcel. The subject site is known as tax map parcel 61-37. It's got a physical address of 79 West Shore Road, and it is situated on the east side of West Shore Road, adjacent to Swansea Lake. The property consists of approximately 10,000 square feet of land, or 0.23 acres, and has 75 feet of frontage along Swansea Lake as depicted on the plans within our application. Currently, the subject site is developed. There is a 1,124 square foot existing camp structure with an associated deck and improvements. The other structures on the site consist of a 220 square foot shed and a 250 square foot garage. Taking a look at the existing dwelling on the property, that is situated about 3 feet off the north side setback currently and is positioned about 45 feet from Swansea Lake. The existing garage along West Shore Road is actually built over the property line and is partially within the right-of-way for the town property. And then we are closer than 5 feet to the property line to the south. Other improvements on this site consist of an existing driveway. There is a drilled well, this location here. And then the leach field is situated as highlighted in yellow on the plan that I have before you now. And you can see it's essentially parallel to the existing house. That's about 60 feet from Swansea Lake currently, is where the leach field area is. So what we're proposing to do on this property is to basically demo all the existing structures. And the reason why we're proposing to demo the structures is because they're very old. I think the existing house or existing camp dates back to 1945, if I'm not mistaken. And all of the improvements on the project essentially date back to that time period. So the foundation is really old. In reviewing this application with the code officer here in town, Mr. Jasmine, we had a lot of discussion about, the structure really doesn't meet any current building code standards, doorway openings, size of rooms, ceiling heights, things of that nature. And so it made more sense to demo the building and reconstruct it. You may ask, why am I going over that? Well, the ordinance for non-conforming structures is kind of unique because on one avenue, you need a variance for any structures that you propose to demo and reconstruct if they're going to be over the existing cubic footage and they're going to be outside of the existing square footage. On the other end, the next paragraph within your ordinance allows you to expand existing non-conforming structures as long as they're not made any more non-conforming. So in theory, if we kept the old structure, we just added on everywhere and we made it more conforming, which is exactly what this project does, we wouldn't need a variance. So by default, in my opinion, when you compare the two paragraphs, we really do meet the spirit and intent of the ordinance because we're making everything more conforming. So with that said, taking a look at what we're proposing for this development, we're proposing to construct a new 3-bedroom dwelling. We're improving the setback to the side property line. We're going about 4.9 feet to the side property line. We're moving it back 50 feet from the lake, so we're improving it about 5 feet in that direction. We're removing the shed and removing the garage, but we're proposing to reconstruct the garage of 240 square feet in a more conforming location, further setback from the sideline, and then certainly bringing it onto the property and situated, we show it about 18.1 feet from the right-of-way line. So along with these improvements, we're proposing to do a number of upgrades to the property. Those consist of constructing a septic field on the property across the street on the other side of West Shore Road. So this septic system would be conforming to town regulations. It would, I would adhere to the 125-foot setback to the lake, would meet all state standards. And we have designed that. We've done the test pits on there so that we know that can be done. On top of that, what we're proposing to do is a number of stormwater improvements on the site. I actually meant to touch on this. I'm going to go backwards real quick. Currently, the stormwater on the site comes through a culvert under West Shore Road. And really that discharges on the property and kind of runs along these two structures down a raised garden area and then down into the lake. In large storm events, that unfortunately actually basically sheet flows across the entire property and goes under the existing structure. And it has resulted in some erosion. There's been erosion received from the roadway, and these intense rainfalls that we had last year. So what we've done is we've kind of embraced, the reality of stormwater, and we've designed a system that accepts, that flow, because that's what we have to do. I mean, that's where the culvert is. And we've reinforced a ditch here along a steeper section of topography. And then we're proposing a rain garden in this location here, which will help treat and kind of slow down the stormwater. From this rain garden, there's going to be a closed drainage section so that you can kind of get beyond the proposed structure, as well as the area that you would like to walk and keep your feet dry, and all of those features. And then we're going to outfall that into another rain garden area here down closer to the lake, and then there will be a spillway that will ultimately allow large storm events to outfall into the lake. This would be, this design is a design that we often do for state shoreline permitting. It's kind of recommended when you're, dealing with some slope challenges, existing drainage, some improvements, and so on. So we've really tried to embrace that with the design and the layout. So what does this mean? I mean, we have existing improvements, we have proposed improvements. So the existing improvements, if we just look at an impervious cover standpoint, just to put everything in perspective for everybody, the dwelling, decks, shed, garage, driveway, walkways, etc. All of that totals 2,684 square feet under the existing conditions. Under the proposed conditions, the dwelling, decks, shed, well, actually, there is no shed, it would just be the garage, driveway and walkways, we have 3,081 square feet. So we have an increase of about, say, 4% impervious cover. But we offset that with the stormwater improvements, infiltration on site, erosion and sedimentation controls. Really, and there's no local requirements for this, but I think it's a good practical evaluation of, how reasonable is the development? How are we proposing to address, some increases in impervious areas? Other things that we have to do, and this is kind of the balance of what's required locally and what we know is required on a state end. The state is going to require that we reestablish some landscaping on the site because we're in the shoreline protection zone. So this area here along the south side of the proposed garage will be re-landscaped and revegetated. And then we have to maintain, a certain amount of vegetation on the site. So there will be additional landscaping. The rain gardens obviously will account for that as well. But this proposal, this property, I guess I should have mentioned this, has been in this family for a long time. And, so the landowners are really excited about, took a long time for them to decide to take away the improvements that they've all benefited from for many, many years. But when you're looking at investing, and certainly in today's time when things cost so much money, you want to invest in the right way. You want to create a structure and that or improvements that are they look like they belong and they meet code safety requirements. So that's the proposal, and happy to answer any questions that the board may have now, or I can go into the the criteria for the variance.
Any immediate questions from the board? Right now, that's not the only chance to get to ask any questions, but I've got a few, but I might wait. This is a public hearing. We will take testimony from folks that are here to talk either for or have or against or have questions to this, but just is the board ready? Is there any immediate questions that any board members have right now before we move into that process? For now, I mean, doesn't mean anything. I'll hold off some of my questions till later. Just state your name for Beverly, please, Barbara.
Barbara Scully.
Yes.
I just have a few questions about the drainage, actually, I think three. So it sounds like what you're handling with that drainage is basically drainage from offsite.
Yeah.
If it comes under through a culvert, then that drainage is really not from your parcel land, right? It's coming from somewhere else and coming across your land.
That's a great question. Do you mind if I answer?
Please
that,
do.
Mr. Chairman? So
Great.
the answer to that question is yes, but we're also managing stormwater on site. So certainly we have off-site drainage that we have to accept and handle, right? This drainage, this off-site drainage from the roadway and from the right of way is currently untreated in the state size. So we are accepting that and treating that and conveying that in a fashion through the property so that there's no negative impacts to our property, my client's property, but also no negative impacts to the lake, which is obviously, something that's of great interest, not only to my clients, but to the town. On top of that, these rain garden areas, the watershed area on this site ultimately drains to the lake. So there is going to be areas captured by this rain garden area, which would be improvements on site, impervious areas on site. And I'm glad you asked the question, because the one thing I didn't address is around the perimeter of this proposed structure, there will be an infiltration trench as well to accept the runoff from the dwelling. So we are mitigating on-site runoff, but we are definitely mitigating off-site runoff too. The result is improvements to the lake.
So would you say that you are mitigating all of the runoff before it gets to the lake? From the site, right? The impervious surface that's on this parcel, are you able to mitigate the runoff from all of that impervious surface before it gets to the lake?
No, we can't, you can't possibly mitigate all the runoff from the site because there's an area like on the lake side that's currently vegetated that's going to accept some impervious area. It's going to accept less impervious area than what it does today, meaning all of the runoff currently on the site goes to the lake. Right now, we've designed practices such as the infiltration trench around the building, the rain gardens, so that we're going to accept more impervious area and treat more impervious area. So the net result is going to be a benefit to the lake, but we are not capturing every single amount of runoff on the property. In order to do that, unfortunately, this is kind of the balance on a state permit again. We would have to disturb area within that 50-foot buffer to the lake, and that's an area that we generally try to be sensitive to because you're better off allowing a vegetated buffer in that area because that'll naturally treat that runoff. And so that's the practices that we're proposing for this project.
And what percent of this parcel would you say is going to ultimately be impervious?
Well, we're increasing, so the total percent is about 30.8% is the total that we're proposing, and currently existing conditions is about 27%. So it's, slightly under 4%, but we're capturing more impervious area. And this project will be an improvement from a stormwater aspect. And that's an important element that our client actually wanted us to incorporate. Honestly, on the state side, we would have to do some stormwater mitigation, but we would not have to do it to this level. So this is really just their goals and objectives exceed state standards. And I'm happy to say that because I think it's important that everybody understands, that they've enjoyed this property for many, many years, and they've taken a lot of pride in, redevelopment proposal to try to enjoy it, for future generations as well.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Beth Musey.
I'm sorry, the first name?
Beth.
Beth,
Musey, M-U-C-C-I.
thank you.
Just wondered, is the property a year-round residence?
Currently, I don't believe it is a year-round residence.
Is the idea for it to be one?
The design, designed for it to be, meaning that there's no provisions on a septic system for seasonal. Like you have to design it based on the number of bedrooms. And so everything will be designed for it to be year round. I can tell you that my client, they reside in out of state, and they have for many years, and they've enjoyed coming here, in the summers. And it's my understanding that that's the way they'll use the property.
So if they wanted to rent it out in the winter, would they have to apply for anything?
I'm not familiar with that. I mean, that hasn't been expressed as an intention of theirs at all. But
And then the second question is, what is the current square foot of the cottage square feet versus the house?
so the existing dwelling is 1,124 square feet, and the proposed dwelling is 1,698 square feet.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I got
Concerns? Go ahead.
not germane, but curiosity's killing me. So when we gave them the benefit of a culvert under the road so we could drain everything onto their private property, did we bother putting ditches or anything in there? Can we put 2 or 3 more culverts in, do you mind? That's pretty nice of us. I assume the 30 acres across the street they own.
They do own that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
I just have a point that perhaps Barbara hadn't joined us when he said that you're moving the leach field. The current septic system is going to be not on that property at all. It's going to be moved back
Correct.
onto the
Property across.
property across the street. So you're, okay, so the waste would be treated where the septic and all that's gonna be away from the water.
Right,
Okay.
and we've done that in a number of locations along Weston. I can think of the two along West Shore Road that we've done that. I mean, it's luckily the DPW director works with the landowners. I think it's a great thing because it puts the septic systems where they belong, which is far away from the waste.
Barbara.
So I guess I didn't realize that the parcel that we're talking about, is it 0.23 acres? Am I
Yes.
reading? Okay, is that from the road to the lake, or is that from the lake beyond the road?
No, that's just this parcel.
Just
here.
that parcel, okay. All right. And so when we were talking percentages, we were talking just that parcel.
That's correct, yeah,
Not, so the parcel across the road is separate,
correct.
okay.
Board members, public hearing is open for anyone who wants to speak or ask questions. I've got just a couple. That trench system that you mentioned going around the house, is that same system going around the garage as well to catch impervious, water coming from an impervious surface?
We actually did not propose that. The garage would have a peak roof here. So this half would likely go right into that rain garden there. But we did not propose anything on the south end, but if that's something the board would like to see, we'd be happy to incorporate it.
Okay. Continuing a little bit more in the right direction. That little, what you mentioned that the state was going to require, when that small green strip there.
Yep.
What's the, why is the state requiring? What does it do? What is it intended to help with, or to, why is it a state requirement? Why would they put that kind of requirement in?
So the state likes to see a certain percentage of the property maintained as what would be like natural woodlands or vegetation.
Yeah.
And based on, the current configuration of the lot, this seemed to be a logical area to incorporate some additional. So it's really just a mitigation component from the state permit.
You say mitigation for water? I mean,
No, it's just vegetated cover.
okay, would that,
Because they look at this is obviously, this is a, protected water body in there,
Oh, yeah.
in the, so from their end, if they can have a certain percentage of each lot within that watershed, make sure that they keep a certain amount of forested, vegetated land, then, they're achieving the goal and objective. So that's what that intent is.
would that little area also pick up a piece of groundwater? Would that actually be an area that actually might mitigate some of the groundwater on the site, that kind of a thing? Is it because it's vegetation rather than just raw land,
I mean, certainly during certain times of the year, vegetation does take up, during growing seasons, it's taken up water, so it helps, dry out. Now, this area of the site, through here and along the front does have a little bit more slope, so it kind of has some slope along the front, flattens out, and then some slope here. So
Okay.
I don't want to mislead anybody. It's not
No,
going to be a
I just-
drainage area, but definitely, anything that's vegetated will, slow down, retain, and uptake some,
Utilize.
runoff.
Barbara?
Do you have any information on the current phosphorus levels in the lake? I myself don't, but I'm thinking that the Lake Association still does testing. I don't know what the status is at this point.
I honestly don't have any information relative to phosphorus for the lake.
That's one of the concerns usually about runoff is increasing the amount of phosphorus.
Right. And so, and I think when you look at stormwater runoff, right, the reason why the state promotes rain gardens, which we've incorporated, is because it has a vegetative component. And vegetation is what kind of absorbs phosphorus and nitrogen. And so, infiltration by itself doesn't necessarily achieve that type of mitigation. So that's why we try to incorporate those, into designs whenever we can.
Another question that's, just because it's June going into July, going into August, if this is set up to be a 4-season home from a 3-season home, Have you given any thought to snow storage and how that might work on this site? Because if they're using it, maybe there's not much to plow, but where would you put snow in the case of this becoming a poor season? And we likely will, January will come again, February will come again. I know it's in our distant future at the moment, but what are your thoughts maybe about how that might be handled on site?
Yeah, so, I mean, they plow this property in the winter time, just so that they can go and, you know, inspect it, or if they're in the area for, you know, a family, whatever it might be, you know, they come more infrequent, I would say, in the winter. But they do maintain it so that people can get in there and check the place out and make sure everything's fine. I would anticipate the snow would be plowed kind of adjacent to this rain garden area here, and snow melt would run through that system and then down here into this rain garden, and then ultimately down into there. That was kind of the intent of, you know, this location up here, was to capture this runoff from the culvert, also capture, you know, some runoff and snow melt from the driveway. And to achieve that, you know, some of the details that we don't typically get into here is, you know, we moved the house back and we've lifted the house up. So there's actually going to be positive drainage flow from the home to the rain garden. So that everything in this front area here, with the exception of this transition zone, you know, along the corner, will drain this way, go through that system and then come that way. And that just prevents, you know, really erosion along this side hill, and also allows that runoff to be treated and routed appropriately, you know, for all seasons.
All right.
So that just brings to mind, is this designed to accommodate a certain event, storm, year storm, like a 25-year, 100-year, or, you know, is it designed for that kind of a parameter?
Right, so I mean, low impact development standards like this are generally designed for 10-year storms.
10.
Because, well, actually, they only have to be designed for a 2-year storm, because that's called the first flush, which is, that's the storm you really want to treat all the time. So we need to be careful in talking about storm events, because it's designed to pass larger storms, but it's designed to treat the first flush. And meaning it's gonna pass, you know, larger storm events, so that there's no, you know, negative impacts to a structure or to the lake. You know, anytime drainage fails per se, it leads to erosion, like a culvert's over capacity, things of that nature. So this is sized, I believe, to the 25-year storm, but the treatment is designed for the first flush.
For 2 years.
For the 2-year storm, yep. And that's standard for lakefront properties through the state.
Switching gears a little bit from the site to the building that exists today. You mentioned doors, ceiling heights, other issues with that particular. Could you describe the situation, and does anything within that current home sort of fail right now? If a first responder had to get in there, is there really, because I know what camps can be like, they can be a little more in sometimes. Are there other health and safety issues or issues of that nature that might be overcome by what you proposed here, given the condition of the structure, the way it's built, the design, the way it's been redesigned maybe over the years? We know how camps can be. What do you see in the existing structure that would be alleviated, particularly if it talks about health, safety, access by first responders, other issues that might be on this in the existing situation?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, certainly the existing structure, given its era built and likely improvements, it meets no standards. So there's no egress windows in any of the bedrooms. So that's certainly a fire safety issue. The ceiling heights, the hallway widths, everything is not, and I'm not a building permit expert, but I know in talking with, Mr. Jasmine, you mentioned that, these are issues that, this is why people don't reinvest and do the expansion option, because as soon as you apply for a building permit, on an expansion, then it kind of opens Pandora's box for all of the other areas of the home. Everything in there is hard to put my finger on one thing. I mean, it's old. And so, but definitely the egress windows in the bedrooms don't exist. So that would be, something of significance from a safety and then, I think even doorway sizes, I mean, the doors were pretty small.
Any questions from the board? Or from anyone here? Joanne, please.
So you're saying there's no windows in the bedroom?
Well, there's windows in the bedroom, but egress windows have to be a certain size in order for somebody to get out of the window. It has to be a certain height off the floor, certain size for somebody to get out. It can't be a double sash window. It has to be like a crank open window. And I would be lying and remiss if I didn't say for the record that I am not a building code expert.
No, that's fine.
But this is just based on my experience in being around that I've seen people really struggle with improving old buildings that have small rooms and small windows.
I presume Mike's been on site here, but you know where the mic.
He's been on site, but I don't know that he's been in the property.
Okay. Any other questions? Wayne, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Brian?
Yep.
Yeah. Anything else, Barbara or Ms. Mucci, that might be, any other questions or? We close the public hearing, and we're all good here at this time, so anything else you want to add before we close the public hearing?
Just if you wanted me to address the criteria. Mr.
Yes, I'm
Chairman.
sorry, yeah, of course. Please do, jump into that.
So the criteria for the variance is outlined in the application, the 5 criteria. So just I'll go down and touch on each one.
Please do.
Number 1, granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest because we say in the application that the existing parcels surrounding the site contains single-family homes which are similar and comparable in size to this proposal. The existing dwelling is a single-story frame camp built in 1945. The proposed dwelling will be built to meet all current safety and engineering standards. The new locations will be more conforming to dimensional standards, and that goes for the dwelling and the garage that's proposed. A new New Hampshire DES approved septic system would be installed on the west side of West Shore Road, greater than 125 feet from the edge of Swansea Lake. And we've kind of touched on the stormwater management improvements that we're proposing, which includes rain gardens, infiltration trenches, riprap swales, and closed drainage. And all of those will reduce erosion and siltation along the shoreline and will improve the existing runoff conditions on the property. So these improvements will directly help protect the water quality of the lake. And then for this reason, we believe this proposal will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or threaten the health, safety, or general welfare of the public. And therefore, granting this variance would not be contrary to the public interest. Moving on, if you want me to continue, Mr.
Please,
Chairman.
unless there's any questions, and we'll ask them.
Okay.
If anyone has any questions, we can still, public hearing is still open. Just let me know.
If the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed because granting this variance would allow for the productive use of the existing property. The proposed site improvements are more nearly conforming than the existing structures. There is no change in the use proposed for the property. Distances from the lake and property lines are improved to the greatest extent practical and are a significant improvement from the current conditions. The project will also increase or allow for an increased investment on the property, which will certainly have an increase in the tax base, allow reasonable use of the property, and will have no measurable impacts to the public. We would actually argue that there would be improvements. This proposal, again, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or threaten the health, safety, or general welfare of the public. And for these reasons, we believe granting the variances would observe the spirit of the ordinance. And I would just like to state for the record here that if these were expansions and not reconstruction, this wouldn't need a variance. So I think that speaks to how this proposal really does meet the spirit and intent of the ordinance, in that we're making everything more conforming. Greater setbacks, greater improvements, etc. Number 3, granting the variance would do substantial justice because granting this variance would allow the landowner to conduct reasonable improvements to an old property and reinvest into a property while maintaining the residential use. The proposed site improvements will be consistent again with the neighborhood and surroundings. And there'll be significant improvements to the septic system and stormwater upgrades. This variance would do substantial justice because it would allow for the productive use of the property and permit much needed improvements and replacement of existing structures in various states of disrepair. We believe that a denial of this variance would be an injustice to the applicant, as there would be no apparent gain to the general public. Number 4, granting the variance would not diminish the value of surrounding properties because this proposal, again, will maintain the use of the property as a single-family residential lot. The use is consistent with the zoning and will have no negative impacts on the surrounding properties. I would state here again, I know it's redundant, but for the sake of putting it on the record, that there's a considerable amount of improvements proposed through drainage, septic, as well as improving setbacks to surrounding properties and the lake. Our experience has been that new home construction or new construction in general, similar to what we are proposing, will typically have a positive impact on surrounding values. And for this reason, we do not believe that this project will diminish the value of surrounding properties, but would likely do the contrary. Number 5, literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship because we kind of discussed in length the subject property. It's a 10,000 square foot lot, 0.23 acres in size, has a fair amount of improvements already. It's essentially the 100, the setbacks really kind of overlap on itself. So when you're looking at a property like this, in literal enforcement would really lead this property to a point where it'd be hard for someone to reinvest and to improve and to make something more conforming without this variance. So it really yields the property or compromises the improvement and the development on the property. In fact, I think the literal enforcement of the ordinance may actually require someone to expand, on a building where it'd be more appropriate to build something in totality under current code and current standards. And because of that, we think we do meet the spirit and intent of the ordinance, and we believe that literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. Part A, owing to special conditions of the property as set forth above that distinguish it from other properties in the area, no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property because the project proposes, and we really, everything I just said kind of applies to this one too, but the project proposes to maintain the nature of the existing use as a residential dwelling. Again, structures will be more conforming to the overall zoning requirements than the existing condition. That everything will move further from the surrounding properties, including the lake. The project proposes significant improvements to stormwater and management features, as well as the construction of a new septic system. Both of which we believe are benefit to not only the landowner or the property owner, but to the general public. When you look at the regulations, somebody could expand the structure and potentially make no improvements. to the property under the second part of this ordinance. So we think that this is the right development. This is the correct way to do it. Our client obviously feels the same way. And so we don't believe that there's a fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance and the specific application of that to the property, because we believe this proposal exceeds the requirements that one could do if they were trying to, to kind of sidestep some of these improvements. And that can be confusing. So if there's, I may not have said that quite right. So if there's questions relative to that, I'd definitely be happy to try to clear that up. And the last part, I'm not sure I have to address that unless the board feels it's necessary, but I will until someone stops me. The proposed use is a reasonable one because, well, basically because of everything that I've just said, we believe this is a reasonable development. The improvements are more nearly conforming than the existing structures. There's improvements to stormwater, improvements to septic, there's improvements to the landscaping, vegetation. We're taking one structure that exists that actually encroaches into the town's right of way. We're demoing that. We think that this project will be an improvement to the site and also to the neighborhood, and will not alter the essential character or the harmony of the neighborhood. And for these reasons, we believe this proposed redevelopment meets the spirit and intent of the ordinance, and literal interpretation would impose an unnecessary hardship for the land.
Any questions? Comments? I have one question. As I always find in a variance application, the way that it's now is all get changed by litigation. And as we move along, things go to court, and that's how zoning goes. We have to be comfortable as a board that there are special conditions of this property that distinguish it from other properties in the area. And you addressed it to some degree, so maybe you can enlighten me a little bit more about what you feel are, but oftentimes I'm finding the variances kind of boil down to this, is that we have to prove that this property itself isn't the same as everybody else's, and that the variance is needed because of that purpose. So maybe reiterate if necessary, but talk a little bit about what goes on this property today that maybe doesn't go on every other property in the area, or what distinguishes it this as different. And Ann, I don't know if you have something to add.
No, I think of one, yes.
Well, let's
And that
see.
it was already pointed out earlier in the presentation, the fact that the town of Swansea's dumping water onto that property through that culvert. So how many properties on Swansea Lake are we doing that to? And what are we doing? Because you explained that during bad storms that the water just sheets right into the lake,
That's the problem.
and that's our fault.
And I think that's kind of what I was going to touch on here. So when you look at every property is different, right? No property is developed the same. So when we talk about these applications, we think it's important to talk about the specific features of this project.
That's right.
So
That's exactly what we're getting.
we have improvements 45 feet to the lake. We're improving, we're pushing those back to meet state criteria, which is 50, and improves the existing conditions. We're improving the conditions on the north property line. While doing that, we're also improving the setbacks with the reconstruction of the garage. Now, all of these improvements do contemplate that existing drainage that comes through the property. So what does that mean? Well, when you lay out a site, so those are special conditions of this property that likely every property probably doesn't have all those same conditions. The other part here is we have an existing septic system that's located here that's about 60 feet from the lake. That's pretty significant. I know for a fact that not all properties on West Shore Road have septic systems this close to the lake. Unfortunately, ones that were built in 1945 might. But when you take a look at the proposal for this site, it balances all of those things, and there are competing interests. Yes, we could have maybe gone to the DPW director and saw if there was any way that we could rework this. Happened to be keenly aware of some drainage issues along West Shore Road. And so in working with the client on this, the decision was made to, let's embrace it and try to create a proposal that mitigates that, but also balances and improves all these other setbacks. And so certainly the drainage coming across this property is a hardship that's unique to this property along West Shore Road. And that drainage does play an essential role in the layout of the site. For example, I can't run a closed drainage pipe, in any other location on this site. You even have the existing dwelling over here. We're maintaining that location. We have to put a septic tank on this side of the structure because we can't get any closer to that well. And so we have to be 50 feet from that well to the septic tank. This is a 75-foot radius.
Yep.
You can't have a septic field within 75 feet of that. And so that's why the field is, going over here. We've really balanced so many things with this plan to try to embrace the existing hardships, deal with the existing nonconformities, and make everything better. Yes.
I just wondered, you said they own the land across the street as well.
Yes.
So what if something that sells, and that there's a shared septic situation, or maybe I'm not understanding? But like if it's not in the family anymore.
So there's an easement that will go with the septic field on that side of the road, so there'll be an encumbrance on that property. So that will be allowed to be there perpetuity.
But would be identified and be part of, if that property is ever developed, that they'd have to work around through
Absolutely.
that particular feature.
Yeah, they're
It's there now.
compromising, that property with this septic system.
Yes.
And it has a house on it right now,
No, it doesn't.
but it has a septic.
It does not. It will have a septic if we're successful in getting this approved.
Across the street would have septic,
Yes,
but no house.
no house.
So that in the future, there could be a house.
It's a separate lot of
Oh,
record,
it's
so
a
the
septic for the current.
we're moving the septic system for this across the road. We're proposing.
Chad, how big is that? Is that a 2-acre lot across the street?
I believe it is. Yeah, we have,
No, that's the lot number. 2.36 acres.
I think it is 2 acres. Yeah.
Is it?
2.5. Okay. But I think
That's the lot
the
numbers, yeah, sorry.
point being, is
2 acres.
if that property across the street does get developed or proposes to get developed, they're gonna have to work with that septic system being, whatever they do, they'll have to meet all other requirements in order to build there. That would include a septic system with a legal encumbrance that benefits the property across the street. But they'd have to work with it. They couldn't just wipe it out and say, all right, well, we'll use that septic system now or something like that. They'd have to deal with it in a proper fashion. As I understand.
Sat on plenty of these meetings.
Anything else from the board? Anything else from the public? What I'll be doing is closing the public hearing. And go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I finally found the VLAB assessment report from 2020.
Well, it's about time.
But it said that lake quality is generally representative of borderline oligotrophic mesotrophic conditions, which is mid-range, with phosphorus and chlorophyll levels that occasionally spike above the thresholds for the lakes. But so basically it's saying chlorophyll A, which is a problem, and phosphorus are stable. Transparency is stable, so it's not, the turbidity is average. pH is stable. However, the conductivity is worsening. And conductivity measures the amount of ions that are circulating in water. So if you have increased runoff, then you're going to get an increase in conductivity.
Okay.
So that's, just in a nutshell. I think the whole report, but in a nutshell, that's what they're saying. So, the phosphorus is stable. It's oligotrophic and mesotrophic in the middle, not quite. It's not. Eutrophic is when everything gets really bad because it's, a lot of algae.
Blooming.
Yeah. although is dead. So it's, the phosphorus levels are okay, the chlorophyll A so far is okay, but again, there is that concern about the conductivity. So something's dealing with the lake, it just hasn't tipped the level yet. So it still is something to be concerned about.
Sure.
In terms of runoff.
And I would just state that this project will result in a reduced reduction of runoff to the lake.
In a relative way.
And
I
yeah,
mean,
because,
this isn't the only place where.
Right, yeah, just
In
that
this
the-
particular
right.
instance, you're.
but I think if
Improving.
everybody develops in that manner, there will be improvements, you know, to the lake.
Right.
That's important.
Incremental and relative.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you. Anything else? Board members or public before we close the public hearing? We'll close the public hearing. Anything to add or anything to discuss or issues to bring up before we go to the questions here? And Wayne, you good?
Yep.
Okay, right. Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. All right. Infamous list of questions. Okay, we agree that, disagree, yes, that granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. And could the variance be granted without being contrary to the public interest? Start with Brian.
I think it could for the reasons that they're improving all the setbacks, which the property currently doesn't meet any of the setbacks. And in fact, encroaches on town-owned property. It actually crosses over onto town-owned property. So it would improve all of the setbacks and would get the leach field away from the water where it shouldn't be in the first place, across the street. So I think everything is going to be improved.
Thank you, Brian. Wayne
I agree, based on what Brian said.
and
I agree that the proposed improvements will result in a positive impact on the public interest, which is to protect the lake.
the main public interest, that's correct. And I'll agree. I don't see any benefit to the public if we denied this based upon public interest. I don't see any benefit, any corresponding or equivalent public interest that would be gained if we denied this. It seems to be the other way. It seems to be a pretty thoughtful use of a 0.23 acre lot, a lot of land there. Okay. Will the spirit of the ordinance be observed if the variance are granted? And
Yes, I think that the purpose of the ordinance is to protect the water and allow the homeowner to make use of their property.
sure.
These improvements will, you know, take that into consideration. So, yes.
Right.
You know, I think our ordinance on waterfront in Swansea is overly restrictive. We're the most restrictive in the state. So we don't even follow state regulation. And with that said, I think the intent and purpose of it is to protect our few bodies of water and keep them clean and usable and public and all of those reasons. And I think the fact that we're pouring water in that's really uncontained, unfiltered, unprotected, just washing across people's properties, putting some swales in there and some water ponds and some vegetation and filter out that water before it hits the lake, I think is certainly an improvement and would be right in line with why we have the
Yep.
strict ordinance that we have. So yes.
Thank you. Wayne?
I would say yes, but based on the non-conforming building
Thank you.
and all of the changes that the engineer has come up with as far as moving the setbacks and cleaning it up really, so I would say yes.
Yeah. I'll agree. I mean, the ordinance itself, which really limits the square footage increases. Are alleviated in one way or another here, it appears. One, they're taking a camp that meets no real housing codes, it seems like, or at least sort of violates a number of them, and that plus the mitigation of the stormwater and other things in the fashion which is described here. I think that sort of that balances out that whole issue of whether this should be allowed. And I think the spirit of the ordinance does get observed here, if indeed these improvements are made. Would granting this variance do substantial justice? Wayne?
Yes, given a lot of the things that we've talked about as far as cleaning up the building, as far as some of the safety issues, improving the setbacks and the septic designs, and yes.
Yeah, that's a number of them. Okay. And
Yes, I'll agree with that.
right?
Yeah, normally I take issue with this question because substantial justice, I always personalize it to the person that's making the
It's hard not
application.
to. It's hard not to, right?
Right? It's gonna be substantial justice for them and nobody else, but in this particular case, I think the town and the people that participate in the usage of that lake. It's hard to measure, it's probably immeasurable, but I think the benefit would be that there's no way that there isn't some justice given to the water body. In the fact that water's not sheeting over somebody's septic system and leach field and washing right into the lake
With no treatment.
with no treatment. And so I think that is going to do substantial justice to more than just the property owner.
Thank you. And I'll concur. I think this does substantial justice in a number of ways. 4, could the variance be granted without diminishing surrounding property values? And
Yes, absolutely. In fact, when I'm considering the septic in particular, it's lot houses with no septic system that end up having 55-gallon drums with some rocks in them. And so you just don't know what could be out there. So any opportunity to take a septic system and move it away from the lake and upgrade it, I would think would reduce the cost of these other chemicals that end up in the lake.
Brian?
Yeah, I think most of the property on that lake is just the same as Wilson Pond. They were built as cottages. They weren't built as year-round homes. Not a single one of them were. And I think over time, people are building them and reconstructing them as year-round homes and putting more money into doing them right and not just cabins. So there's absolutely no way that it would not increase property values on the lake.
Wayne?
I agree.
I as well, and we have no evidence, no a butter or other interested party has given us any testimony or evidence that this would reduce a property value. So we don't have anything really in front of us to be able to make that determination anyway. So I don't think, I don't see any evidence that the diminution of surrounding property values would happen should we grant this variance. Do special conditions of the property exist that distinguish it from other properties in the area? Wayne?
Did we miss one?
This one.
5, do special conditions of the property exist? You have to determine that special conditions of the property exist that distinguish it from other properties in the area. It's embedded in our,
Okay, I would say, yes, there are special conditions that would highlight.
yeah. And
Yes, as I pointed out, at least I think there have to be maybe a couple of homes on that lake that have storm drains that the town has put in directly on their property.
yeah,
I would say that's unique and
that's quite unique. Ryan, you,
Yeah, I agree with Ann. I think the culvert dumping onto their property is certainly unique.
Yeah.
And certainly a hardship. And,
Yeah, I think that alone is, and we discussed that when we were talking about that special condition of having that need to accept all that storm drain onto this
Yeah, I
property
mean,
as
certainly.
it is now.
That's right, because
And
it's
then-
just washing, like I said, not over the property itself, but over the septic system, whatever system is currently there,
Into the lake.
into the lake, and making a fair portion of their property unusable during rain events.
Okay, I'll concur. Owing to these special conditions of the property distinguishing it from other property in the area, we're really talking, it appears that we've settled in on that drainage and existing conditions. Do we agree that there's not a fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance, which is the lack of or the inability to expand to a larger square footage, and the specific application of the provision to this property? Do we agree that the special conditions being there's not a fair and substantial relationship between our ordinance and what they're looking to do? Brian?
Yes.
Wayne?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes,
And I'll concur. And A2, do we agree that the proposed use, which is residential, really, is a reasonable one? Ann?
yes,
Wayne?
Yes.
Brian?
No way.
No way.
Yes,
I get it. And I concur. All right, so subparagraph A1 and A2 are met, meaning we don't have to go to B. So given that fact, we've gone through our own questions. We have answered all of the questions in the affirmative. It looks like unanimously. I would entertain a motion on this variance.
I'll make the motion that we accept this, that we approve this variance application for ZBA 22-008.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Wayne. Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, seeing none. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you again.
Thank you for your time.
I appreciate the presentation. Good job. All right. We move on to public hearing B. ZBA 22-009, the variance application. West Swansea Road Solar Garden LLC requests a variance from section 5, article B1 of the zoning ordinance to construct, install, and operate an approximately 3 megawatt ground-based solar array, on property owned by Patrick Putnam Realty Group LLC, subject property located at 909 West Swansea Road, shown at tax map 71, lot 13-2 in both the business and rural agricultural districts. I will once again seat Wayne for Bill. We understand the 2-2 issue here. We don't have a full board. I presume that because you're standing and ready to go, that you do want to move forward with this application. Moving forward. Great.
just a point of order.
Yeah.
You know that we're supposed to be set up like a court where you have the podium and everything. You know. So you don't have to stand there. You can stand
Yeah, sure,
wherever
you
you,
can
wherever
stand.
you're comfortable.
We'll move around.
Okay, go ahead. Tell us what you're looking to do.
All right, thank you.
Identify themselves.
Yep, of course.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
For the record, Andrew Keller, the applicant from
Okay, thank you.
private entity as well, which is on the application. I also have with me Jeff from Cleveland Water and Bath, who will go through the actual legal application in a minute here. We also have on Zoom, we have Cassandra, who is also with Novus Engineering, who will be performing all the engineering as we go through the planning board process.
Okay.
Subsequent to this, we also have in the audience, Mr. Cox here as well. He has some legacy information about the property, the use that was originally approved, which is going to be a gravel pit. It went through all its full approvals and had pretty much everything he had to move forward with that. If there's any questions about that, I would like the board to allow him to speak to it if appropriate.
Sure.
So those are just some of the different folks that are here. What I'd like to do is just give the board a little bit of color on this project because it has been working through the town process for almost a year now. And there are some significant benefits to the community as a greater whole, not just a traditional solar project that might just help the property owner or, you know, the town wastewater treatment plant, for example. So we started out, like I said, almost a year ago, reaching out to the town to find out if this property was a good use for a community solar project. We wanted to make sure that the board of selectmen had some say in the taxation of how the solar panels would be taxed. So we went and took the time to go in front of the board of selectmen to ensure that we had a mechanism for taxation that follows state statute. There's a payment rule tax agreement that we have in place now with the town. It went through a public hearing process. So the town is starting to hear a little bit about this project at that early stage level. We had quite a few different conversations with the current planner before Sarah came into that role and had an opportunity to get some feedback on what process we should follow with this town. During that process, and there has been some rules that have come forward in the last couple of years that allow whole communities to come together and put together a community power program. Your town, and some people may be familiar with this, your town has a committee and is moving forward with Standard Power. It was also with other New Hampshire-based company to bring the community power project together. So everybody in this town can come together and get cost for their power to be less than what they're otherwise paying. It really does is allow somebody, a homeowner, who uses a small amount of power to get the same price for their power as the school or the town or one of the other bigger users in the community. So it brings everybody together as a co-op. And it allows them to bundle all their power and go get the best price for power. The spirit and the intent of this law in New Hampshire was to allow communities to come together and actually get their power locally. It could be from a local hydro facility, it could be a biomass facility, it could be a solar project, it could be a wind project. It was the intent there was to have the renewable energy portion to be local or regional. So within our process of speaking with the town, the committee was interested in this project because it's right here in your community. What we're seeing with a lot of these projects is there's going to be probably need to look outside your town because there aren't projects being developed in every single New Hampshire town right now that could meet the time when these community power programs actually are turned on. So towns have to look outside their community, but there's a real interest in knowing that the power is here, like the town is getting the maximum benefit. So we were developing this project with the intent to deliver this power to a community power program in New Hampshire, preferably locally. We always bring it to the town that we work with. So fortunately for us, the community power committee was very interested in that. They're interested in utilizing the power from our project. They recognize that this project is moving down the permitting process, which I'll speak to in a second. And I'll wrap up now. I'm happy to answer questions on the solar front. Obviously, Jeff can handle the legal and Cassandra can handle the board engineering, so it's necessary to this to the board. What we have done so far to date, just to get everybody up to speed as well, other than having that pilot agreement in place with the board of selectmen, having the intent of the community power committee to utilize our power as part of the energy mix. Not going to be all of it, it's going to be a portion of it. We've also done all the site survey work with Novus. We've gotten all of our existing condition site plans put together. We're preparing to come in front of the planning board, depending on how this evening goes. We have submitted all of our engineering to Eversource. They are about halfway through their engineering process, which gives us an understanding of what the impacts are to the project, to the community, because if there's any upgrades that are required, it's on us. So if there's anything that needs to be done with any line changes, you're not going to see big transmission lines in your street. They're the same lines that are going down the street today. But if there's any work that needs to be done to those lines, any work that has to be done back at the substation, which is in your town as well, that all falls on us as the developer and the project itself. So there are some other value other than the whole town coming together to buy their power at a lower price, which if anybody's seen the news recently, we just got word that utilities are doubling their price for power up to north of 20 cents. We do some development work. My wife does development workforce down in Puerto Rico, which has been devastated by issues with hurricanes, and their power rates are through the roof, and theirs aren't even at that rate right now. So we are moving towards this elevated rate for power. So these community power programs really have a real benefit to the community. So with that said, that's where we are. We didn't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We want to make sure that we gave your board the opportunity to chime in and let us know if this makes sense from your perspective. We've heard from the board of selectmen's position. We've got a little bit of feedback from the planning department, understand how this fits in. Our goal and our intent is to keep it all within the business district. And with that, I'm going to pass on to Jeff to walk you through the ZBA applications.
Sure. So the reasoning behind the variance application is because the property the area of this property where the solar array will be installed is in the business district that does not allow solar as one of the uses. And because of the way the zoning ordinance is written, you can only use one of these certain uses. It has to be on that list. If the town didn't happen to include it, you need a variance. Because this is a standalone array, a solar array would be allowed as an accessory to put it on a roof, for example. But because this is standalone, suddenly it becomes impermissible, and that's what this variance is for. So it's just limited to that. There's no variance necessary for any of the other elements. There's no area variance necessary, for example. I think there are other business districts within the town that do allow solar. It's just this business district does not. So that's the variance we're looking for. The written application that I see some of you flipping through goes through all 5 elements individually, specifically, for the sake of brevity. I know everybody's sitting through here, so I'm just going to hit on the highlights for now. This is in a business commercial district. The surrounding uses are commercial. This is not going to change the essential character of the neighborhood. None of the harms that the zoning ordinance is intended to prevent are really going to be here. There's going to be no noise. There's going to be no sound, pollution, odor, traffic increase. There's really no burdensome here at all. There's no health or safety concern. This is solely going to be a benefit to the society, to everybody involved. It's certainly going to be a better use for the property for everybody surrounding it than a gravel pit would be. If you ask any neighbor, I'm sure they'd rather have a solar array than a gravel pit. This is a reasonable use for this property, given the specific conditions of this property. It is uniquely suited for a solar array. This property has a lot of slope to it that makes it difficult to develop under ordinary circumstances, or at least more cumbersome because of that slope. I believe it's gradients in excess of 15% in places. And there is a plan included in that packet that has those gradient lines in it. So you can see that this is sloped. It is, but that slope that makes it difficult to develop for any other purpose makes it perfect for solar, because you do want that slope and it gets you more exposure to sunlight. So that really cuts in both directions. State law, while the zoning ordinance does not permit for solar, state law does say that solar is important, solar is reasonable, and it prohibits solar from being unreasonably prevented on a zoning basis. That's RSA 672(1), Roman numeral 3A. I believe that was included in the packet as well. So really, this is no harm in this to anybody. It's only going to be a net benefit. We've got environmental benefits from having clean energy, local energy, cost benefits to the public of having a community power supply, as Andrew just discussed. This is a net benefit to everybody involved. And with that, we're happy to take questions.
So I have a few questions. The first question really is for you, Mr. Chairman. Is this behind Old Johnson's place down there? I'm trying to, I have trouble placing it.
This is the Seacords.
Oh, it's down behind Seacords.
Seacords, yeah, that long structure you see in their topographical.
Seacords.
Yep.
Okay. Now I know where you are.
Just right after the, isn't the egress into this property right after the going from housing?
I believe
No, that'll be the trailer park down in there, right?
No, it's like 4 buildings out in the back there.
I think, I don't see those on there.
Evergreen, no.
Evergreen, no, but I can get
North end of the park. So that's-
at the north end, but the egress, I think, is on their own property.
Yeah, but it would be south of the entrance into the back. of the-
Yes.
That's correct.
Yes.
So I guess my questions beyond that are going to be, you mentioned the solar array that the town just put in at the sewer plant.
Correct.
In size, can you just detail, give me a rough scale?
Relative, one relative to the other.
Yeah. On what you're planning, what that
I
is.
believe that was a 1 megawatt project.
I think it's 1.3.
Okay, so this is 3, so almost double.
Okay,
Yep.
almost triple.
And that just benefits the sewer plant, right?
That just sewer plant, yeah, so that leads me to my next question.
I'm sorry,
This,
just for the record, this is double or the sewer plant one's double?
this would be
Almost
almost triple the
This would
sewer
be,
plant.
okay,
Yep,
that, thank you.
Comparison of 1.3 to 3.
So my next question would be, is this going to benefit residents of Swansea? And how do we do that if it goes into the grid? Because you have to feed that somewhere, so you gotta feed it into the grid, right?
So it's not there's 2 ways of looking at it. First off, the answer is it's only going to benefit the town of Swansea residents. So each town has its own community power committee. And the job of that committee is to bring together all the residents under this new state law that was passed, I think, 2 years ago now, that allows all the residents to be bundled together. And now, then that committee works together to procure power from your traditional third-party provider, like a Constellation or Next Year, one of those people that like not EverSource, that you can get your other power from, right? And their job is to go out and find the best price for the whole community.
Right.
Again, part of the intent, like I shared with you at the beginning, was that they as in the legislators, which is, I think the spirit of it was to make sure that some of the power wasn't just from some plant in Wisconsin that you guys don't touch, see or know, and it's spewing out, fossil fuel. The intent was that a portion of it comes from renewables. Some towns have goals of meeting up 100% renewable by year 20, whatever, 45 in the future. I haven't gotten into real details, but this project specifically will allow your town to start to move in that direction. I don't know if your town set a specific goal of this much, this percentage of renewable by this year. I don't have that information in front of me. But this allowed the committee to move in that direction, because we're one project. I don't know if there's the ability to do another project until we have our engineering back from EverSource. We won't know if there's more capacity to go on those lines or go into that substation. But I think the smart decision of the committee and some of the advice we're getting from this third-party group they're working with is to start somewhere.
Right.
And this project, I don't remember if it's, maybe 10%, maybe 5 or 10% of the overall power of the whole town. Again, you're gonna get power for the whole town, but this project is gonna offset about, say, 5 or 10% of it.
Right, I need to be fair, the questions I'm asking have nothing to do with the variance.
Right, of course.
You're only here for one question and we either give a yes or a no, and that's the end of that. And I'm just asking because curiosity is killing me on it. Because it also, if I'm not mistaken, EverSource owns all the copper, but they don't own all the poles. I mean, Consolidated owns a fair portion of the poles, so they're gonna have to pay rent to,
It's a process.
in theory, the Consolidateds and EverSource of the world to transmit your power to us, right?
Yes and no. So within the study process that EverSource goes through, what they're really looking at is what is the impact of this power coming onto the lines that are there existing today. There is no intent to change out poles. There's no intent to change even the lines in a perfect world. Sometimes the voltage on those lines cannot handle that amount of power. So
Sure.
the lines have to be upgraded.
Sure.
They're not like bigger, they just can handle a different amount of voltage coming from the project. So we don't really get into paying rent to this person, that person. At the end of the day, the whole process allows us to go into the EverSource approval process, say your cost to upgrade these lines and potentially the substation and to preserve the project, both itself going this way and going out if there's ever like a power outage. They need to be able to shut that thing down because it's going to keep generating power when the sun's out. So it has to have the proper safety mechanisms so the line workers are obviously safe. Standard kind of out of the box kind of stuff we do, but we really don't get into, multi-negotiation with EverSource and Consolidated. If we do some pole replacements or other work like that, we have to get Consolidated all day. But right now we don't, at this point, don't know that we have to do that.
All right, and then my last question is slightly germane in that when they came to front of us for the solar array that's at the city of King sewer plant.
Yep.
we were specifically told, as I recall, they weren't gonna have to clear up very many trees. At the end of the day, they had to take out over 300 trees.
Okay.
So it was slightly misleading.
Sure.
Clearly, that's a wooded lot, so you're gonna have to clear out presumably some trees.
It's actually not what it is, not at all.
Really?
That's the good news about that. This is most scrub there, you know, Mr. Putnam could speak to it if you'd like, but, you know, we're staying within, and again, the elevation of it is, to Jeff's point, allowing us to kind of maximize that southern exposure. Whereas if you just have a flat wooded lot, you really have to clear out so you don't have the impacts of shading coming in from those trees, but you can speak to just really quickly.
I'll give you a quick, Pat Putnam, Putnam Realty Group. I'll give you a quick synopsis on that. We bought the property in 2009 from Broadfest LLC. It was two brothers who cleared out the property. So everything you see there is second growth. The brothers never approached New Hampshire DOT regarding the pine trees growing and shadowing Route 10. And so that was left alone because of the steepness going down to Route 10. So that's why the trees there look original, much taller, much bigger. And then on the other side of the property, you have a huge swath of conservation land, which is all going on full height. So what you're dealing with on our property right now is second growth.
Okay.
Some small hardwoods, some small pine. In this climate, we deal with second growth. It grows quite fast. You know, white pine will grow in 18 inches a season.
Right.
Hardwood, some of the hardwoods will grow as fast, but not quite as fast. So what you're seeing up there now is basically all second growth.
Perfect.
From
Thank you.
2009.
Question.
I yield back.
This is a public hearing. Barbara?
Barbara Scully. I just want to say that myself and Bob Audette were both part of the ad hoc committee, the community power committee that brought the whole issue up for voting at some meeting. And so there was an ad hoc committee, and we're now in the process of forming a permanent energy committee. And both of us are most likely going to be part of that committee. They're still getting a couple more members on that. But as mentioned, you know, the hope was that we would be able to use more local resources, you know, if not bring in town, at least more local and not something from out west in terms of renewable resources. So we were very pleased to hear about something like this coming right to our town.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, sir.
Audette,
Bob.
Thank you.
Sure. So, yeah, through this process was relatively painless, thanks to Standard Power. You know, some of the goals we talked about was building resiliency in the community and having our power local, so we weren't so dependent on outside sources. So when we learned about this was pretty exciting. And again, it's a renewable resource too. You know, eventually we'd love for Swansea to be 100% renewable, and if we could keep it as close to home as possible. And it's probably gonna be cheaper in the long run than propane, coal, fossil fuels, because renewables are dropping in price. And that's one question I had for the committee, for these guys. You know, we're talking 20 cents, Eversource is talking 20 cents. What is, and again, this gets to what Brian was talking about, energy is fungible. Once it's on the grid, right, it goes anywhere, but we're paying these guys to produce energy.
For your town.
What is it gonna cost me?
That's part of the committee process. Is going to be probably in the 13 well, let me start out saying, it depends if the committee in the town wants the renewable energy attributes as well, the RECs, which I know you guys are probably familiar with, but for the rest of the board and others in the public, the environmental attribute can come along with the price of the power or exclude it. Meaning you're just buying the power, or you're buying the power plus the renewable energy credit, which allows you then to meet some of these sustainability goals. You can't, just because you have solar and you do this, if you don't retire the renewable energy credits as a town, you can't say that we just dropped our dependency on foreign oil by 5%, 10%. You have to do that. So to answer your question, it's going to be in the 13 to 15 cent range is what we expect.
And
With the renewable energy credits.
I wanted to point out too that the power committee technically doesn't exist anymore, so Barbara and I are here as residents of the town. We're not speaking for any
But potential.
potentially, we're not really speaking as a town official.
Yeah.
But what we went through in the last 6 months, building resiliency, getting our power locally, decreasing the cost, thinking about the future, I urge the zoning board to approve variance.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. If I may add just to that, just for clarity. So when you look at the renewable energy portion of the fuel mix, the intent of these community power programs as they evolve over time is that today we might be at, say, 5% renewable. And that may be, right now, it may actually be a premium compared to what you're getting your power for because of what's going on in our world. But the goal is that you're utilizing a larger stack, unfortunately, of non-renewable energy at a lower price. Then you stack on the renewable energy, which again, before felt like it might be a premium, but now it's becoming actually coming at a lower price. Ultimately, together, when you put those together, the goal of all these community power programs across all the different towns is to deliver power cheaper than any other option you can get because you are a buying group. I just want to be clear that you ask a direct question, give me a direct answer, but I want everybody in the community to understand that together, this is going to lower everybody's power below what they would otherwise have available to them. As like, this is the street, Mr. Jones on Oak Street, like you can all benefit from this community power.
And
I don't recall, and you could remind me if, when we had the discussion to build the solar array at the sewer plant, there was some concern about floodplain because they were gonna have to
Yes.
put poles in the floodplain
Yep.
and also to protect some of the wildlife that exists there.
Yep.
So concerns that I would have, and I don't know if it's appropriate for myself or maybe for the planning board, but the slope that you were describing, are you gonna have to blast?
No.
Are you gonna have to, how will you,
So-
what holds the solar array?
Yeah.
From sliding off the hill?
Of course, great question. So let me start with the floodplain issue. So obviously being up high there, we're outside of floodplain. We prefer to be way outside of floodplains because it's very cost prohibitive otherwise to shore them. So we are not in the floodplain. The way that we're going to work with the slopes, our engineers are doing some of their work right now to prep for the planning board to understand what the cut and fills will look like. So when you get a nice clean slope, self-facing below the state threshold, which is a 15% or less slope of these types of soils, those different soil types that distinguish the, the pervious nature of the panels.
Yep.
So, the detention basins of the swales that we would have to otherwise put on the property. So that's in process right now. Mr. Putnam had done some initial test probes in parts of the property that we were utilized for information about, where we go in the ledge, if there is ledge, how does that affect?
They were gonna use it for gravel anyway, so.
Right, they didn't care, but we do.
All right.
We're doing some additional work on that to make sure as we go down the property, we have a good understanding of all those. So when we do those cuts and fills, we don't hit a big thing of ledge. But if we did, the type of equipment that we utilize in our industry, especially in New England, is it's a kind of earth screw situation where you can tap into the ledge, into rock, and then you drill into the actual post itself into that material, and then everything gets built upon it.
Barbara,
Will you be needing an alteration of terrain permit?
We sure will. Yep. for
So
over
a lot of the
100,000 square feet.
drainage issues will be
Yeah.
taken care of.
We did not have any habitat hits there, we went through the state agencies for those, we were fortunate enough, so we don't need to go to that next level of AOT has a new procedure for habitat, like a habitat assessment report, we were not required to do that on this property. But we still will go through the full AOT process as part of our state permit,
So there were no endangered hits
there were not.
or threatened?
Nope, but typically, again, from a habitat perspective, the other comment brought, we typically do like to utilize like wildlife friendly fencing. Like to raise it up 6 or 12 inches so the little creatures can come and go freely, but we have the wildlife so that way the big guys can't come up and over the top, hopefully, typically. So we do take all that into consideration, our normal course of business. Regardless of what the outcome was of any of those hits, but fortunately, there have not been any.
yes,
That's near Steve. So I've lived in Pine Grove Mobile Home Cooperative for 23 years, and so I really like the idea of solar energy and all that. I just have a couple of technical questions. So you're saying Putnam or some owns it now?
Yes.
So it's not any of Pine Grove's land?
No.
But it like abuts it or something?
It was.
Okay, and if you look at it from Route 10, would you see the panels? It doesn't really matter.
Coming down, yeah, probably you would start.
If you're coming from the south,
South,
even
up.
going, running north,
Yeah,
you would see.
but to the north, coming south, until you turn, you
So
have to
it's
look back.
basically up on that hill behind Seacords that they cleared out a few.
You got it, yep, that's correct.
And where is the entrance?
So it'll be right along this side of, well, so we have two access points right now. We have one, there was an approval for a curb cut on the side of Route 10, right next to the property that's
The birthing.
the birthing center.
Yes.
Thank you. The challenge there is it looks to be from our engineer's perspective, a good location to come off of the lines with Eversource and meet their requirements. They have certain requirements of how many poles you have to put on the property. That seems to be a nice clean pull off for the meet Eversource's requirements. But then for construction and it's like twice or three times a year, we might have a truck up there, like, take care of vegetation management or other things like that. We probably will come from, just south of the housing facility. And we'll come up around and sweep around that way for our more permanent construction and then ongoing operations and maintenance. And then the bottom of the hill will be where the detention basin goes for maintaining our stormwater requirements to meet the state AOT process.
Do you need permission from Evergreen Knoll to get there?
We're not
No, we're not touching, we're only taking our property,
They're on their own property.
on our own property. On
Oh,
both
next to it.
Yep,
Yeah.
you got it.
Can you get there from Cobble Hill Road, from way up on the end?
No,
So we kind of explored, like that was what we tasked our engineers to do is, okay, the first attempt was to use the current curb cut, but the amount of work effort to get the road to meet the requirements we needed to, it was gonna start to become very cost prohibitive. But that still makes sense for good locations for the poles here, so they can pull out their trucks, they don't have to go too far, they love that. But for us, ongoing construction, it'd be nice to kind of come around the side and then kind of have our access over there, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind.
And do you have people four-wheeling on that property now or no?
there's a access road through the conservation. It looks like there's an old logging road from through the conservation land over on the west side of the property. And that does appear to be used occasionally by four-wheelers. I don't know where they're coming from, but that seems to be their access point.
Yeah.
They generally go up into the area that was partially excavated, not by us, but by the prior owners before us.
Mhm.
And they seem to flail around in there with the ATVs and then they go back out the same way they came in.
So would that affect the panels or, I mean, would you
Well,
just-
it wouldn't be allowed.
The good
It's gonna be a secure site.
Yeah, the fence, and the good news is that we are looking to optimize the site as much of the flat areas that we can use, so really there's only gonna be the slopes that are gonna be left, and nobody's gonna have fun with a four-wheel on a slope like that. So it will reduce that, if there's any noises or sounds that are, that will help reduce it, we'll be a secure site.
Yeah.
It'll be a very secure.
Yeah, you got it, everything's monitored remotely. So,
Yes.
Where's the substation?
it's right up the street here, so it's about 6 miles from the property, so that's the, right here.
You have to string new lines to the substation?
Right now, it doesn't look that. We've done some of our initial electrical engineering work. We've checked some of the voltage. That's the critical piece from Eversource. That's what we all hold our breath for is, okay, the good news is if we did have to do any like changing the line voltage to support it, again, the poles stay the same, the crossbars stay the same, or they go to that kind of like the shapes of the lines you see kind of going back towards Keene, where it goes from like the crossbar to like the hexagon style, which are actually better. So if for some reason we had to upgrade those lines to that version, those are insulated lines. They can handle a tree falling on them without losing power. So there are some benefits if we did have to, we prefer not to. But that's part of our work is to see what happens, and hopefully we don't have to do anything.
What's your timeline?
So again,
What's your timeline?
so
If you got approval,
our goal is to be fully approved with Eversource and the town and the state. Looks like we're shooting around October right now. The way things are scheduled.
to start construction in October then?
No, we would need some time. I say October is my wish, but as always, there's gonna be a couple months of delay. But more importantly, we've seen the effects of this. You heard about the tariff stuff with the solar panels. We're now freed up that issue around the tariffs on panels and people slowed down. Right, I know. But we now have a ripple effect of the slowdown. So realistically, this would start because we don't have to do much in the way of tree clearing. To answer the question, there's maybe some small perimeter, but not really anything of tree clearing. That might happen over the winter, but I would say the majority of it will start in spring.
Board questions? I'd just like Sarah to confirm for us, this is a little bit of a nuance on a variance, is that
Yeah.
what we're talking about here is not something that's in violation of our ordinance, but it's just not there.
Correct.
So what we're approving here is not, it's just not on the list. right?
Correct. The only district where utility generation is on the list is Village Business 2.
Uh,
And I suspect it has something to do with the water utility.
Also, when this ordinance was written, we were really doing solar panels.
Correct. Correct.
Some
We're not the
residents,
only town with that is a problem we were facing.
well, I mean, some residents were, but they weren't getting the payback because of UVs in this part of the country in the wintertime. It's just, technology hadn't caught up with it yet.
Price of power is really low back
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Just one point that I think I'm on beam with, and it's just a note to you guys here on the board, is that I know Community Powers new, so to speak, to our, at least to our town and to our state and so forth. And it has value. I just want to try to just kind of explain that I don't think that can come into our decision making.
Right.
You know, it's really, I mean, the variance application is the variance application, and that's sort of a non-tangible, you know, piece to what we're talking about. I think it's laudable and praiseworthy, and we should be moving in that direction, all the good stuff, but I think we want to be careful we don't use that as part of our reasoning for approving this.
Yeah, we're only really hearing the case. really
This piece of
on-
property
on
for this
one piece of-
use, yeah,
Because it's solar array, energy generation of
yeah,
business district.
yeah, and it really doesn't, our communities support us of its own power source is great, but I think we want to make sure we don't mix the two here, or justify our decision based on that.
No.
Could you put a cornfield up here if you wanted to today? Not necessarily, I mean, not asking about, you're not farmers, but
No, good question. You'd have to bring in a lot of soil, a lot of good loam to make it happen, because those are just gravelly, sandy soils there.
it could be farmed if we chose
With
to.
those slopes.
Not necessarily, well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm getting to the next question,
Could
but,
be an apple farm, I guess.
It'd be great to grow grapes there.
okay.
There you
Right.
go.
I-
It's a great summer, yeah, an apple orchard.
Well, it's part of why I asked the question is I see solar, you know, you talk solar garden, solar farms, it's a way to farm in a different way.
Absolutely.
That's my own personal opinion.
One of my original variances I requested in New Hampshire was on that position.
Premise, yeah.
That was it was a new form of farming.
Yeah.
It was passed in the record.
Right. You talked about this property being, I won't say unique, but certainly you spoke to the slopes. You spoke to this sort of, I don't know, I don't want to quote you, but ideal nature of the land as it sits today. Is that typical, or is this relatively?
So you're lucky, right?
Yeah, kind of rare to find something like this, the way it is, maybe already been cleared, I'm getting back to, as I did, if you heard me the first time, we have to prove that, that there is a uniqueness to this property, that it distinguishes, this property gets distinguished from other properties in the area. So is it relatively, say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to that end, in this area, you can define area in a number of ways, but in this area, is this really a special, does this property have that special condition that you alluded to it? Can you speak directly to that for us?
Yeah, great question. I would absolutely say yes, it does have a unique, couple of different attributes that stand out for us.
Okay,
I look at, in my career, I've been doing this for 12 years, I looked at over 1,000 properties in New Hampshire. And of that, I'm gonna guess maybe 2 or 3% of them turn out to be an actual project. And the reason for that is mostly because wetlands, hydric soils, floodplain, wooded lots, and ledge. So as we look at those couple of things, And let me, the most important one I should start out with is proximity to the infrastructure.
Yeah, that's
Like,
true.
always
Thank you.
what we think about before I get even any further into the
Yeah.
other stated. But, so as we look at these projects, we always want to be as close to the substation as possible.
Yeah.
As you look, if you were to pull up the GIS for this part of town and move in the direction of where the substation is, it's almost all in floodplain. So that knocks out anything that's from here to there as an opportunity. Plus, as you all know, as we're in this part of town, it's smaller lots, it's tighter, there's more trees. And we typically need to have trees at least twice the distance as they are tall from the panels. So if you have a 20-foot tree, you need to be 40 feet from the panel. If you have a 50-foot tree, you gotta be 100 feet away. So you need these areas that are more open. So to your point, the lot has south-facing, which is ideal, because we probably all know about solar. It's been cleared, it's up high, so that some of the other tree growth, we can deal with it, even if there is some shading in, the winter months when the sun sets to the west, we might get that a little earlier than a big open field, but that's okay. And that proximity to the substation again is important because there's not much else going down Route 10 that has that kind of space. So yes, I would say that those are some specific reasons why this stood out, and we did feel pretty lucky, yes. Divine, and I've known Mr. Putnam for many years, we've tried many times to do some work together on some properties he's known over the years. And he was persistent, I think I was persistent too, and here we are with what hopefully will be a project.
Okay.
I'm just gonna echo what the chairman said. The other conversations that we've had have been great conversations, absolutely have nothing to do with what we are allowed by law to vote on, right?
Right.
I think it's good conversations, good education for us, and we'll certainly spew it into the community. I agree with Mr. Chairman that community power has some good benefits. I have some grave concerns about it, but I think that overall, something's got to go down.
We gotta move.
Good. And if I may add to the last couple of components is the habitat and the archaeological issues. Initially that and utility was one of the concerns I had because we're so close to the river. Some turns, we've had some projects where you're on the right bend of the river and you can find some archaeological remnants that can kill a project. And we have seen habitat or archaeological issues kill projects. So we have come to this point where we've cleared most of those except for the utilities.
Yeah.
Well, and respectfully, this evening.
So there's been a phase 1 archaeological review?
We had the initial, we did do a phase 1, didn't I? I'm trying to remember, am I confusing with yes, we did have an initial request by the state, we did the phase 1 and there was nothing.
There was no recommendation of moving to
No
phase
need to move
2,
forward with the
a phase 2.
You got it, correct, sorry, thank you, I was sure.
Yeah, as Aaron said, they had wildlife hits on the airport.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But none of those here.
And that area really should be a wildlife preserve.
Yeah, right.
Reluctant to do it for whatever reason, but
Yeah.
they still managed to pull it off.
You got it.
Well, I also do want to clarify one issue. Some of these benefits of renewable energy, cost benefits to the town, they're not things that the board should just completely ignore. They are relevant indirectly to some of the elements of a variance. Whether this variance is in the public interest, whether it's consistent with substantial justice. Those benefits all taken, for example, substantial justice involves a cost, benefit, advantages and disadvantages analysis of public advantages and disadvantages versus the advantages and disadvantages to the applicant. In this case, there's no disadvantages to the public, there's only public benefit. And obviously there's applicant benefit. So those sort of factors do weigh in favor of granting this variance.
Barbara?
Can the board take into account that given the characteristics of this land, I mean, the slope, the rocky nature, I mean, and that it's in a business district, I mean, very few businesses would be able to function there without doing significant land moving.
Well, one of the things we have to determine is that if we had to move positively on a variance would be that special conditions of the property exist that distinguish it from other properties in the area. It's something inherent with a variance you have to prove anyway, is that this is this property is that's what we hang our hat on almost to make sure that, in order to give a variance is that this distinguishing features to this property. Like in the last one that we did, it was that It was the runoff from the other, coming right straight down through. There's very few properties around the lake that have that level of that kind of runoff going right straight down through their property to the lake. That's a distinguishing feature. And in here too, is what we were trying to talk about, is the slope nature of it. You mentioned a number of things that makes this.
There's no other property of this size that's been clear cut with these south facing slopes in the business. district.
Natural slopes.
Yeah.
Like some of that, right, in this area. You don't have to go too much
Right, in
further.
that area,
Right.
Exactly.
Plus the soil structure.
You got it.
I mean,
Exactly.
That's important too.
there
We
is-
like those A-type soils, so we can really maximize the slope and we can make sure that we're not dealing with the runoff and stormwater appropriately.
Yes.
I just was curious just for visual, the one behind the Humane Society, have you seen that one? Solar panels,
Wastewater plant.
On
way
Route 10.
behind the Humane Society. And
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I think they have their own,
They might
there's
know.
like 3
Relative-
long roads,
Yep.
like just in an open space, and it's really amazing, but that's the only,
Yes.
I was just wondering how many panels, height, that kind of.
Yeah, very similar. I haven't seen it, but I'm guessing most ground mount systems are pretty similar. So you're gonna have panels that are either 2 in portrait or 4 in landscape. So they go up usually from about 3 or 3.5 feet off the ground up to about 8 or 10 feet at the highest point, south facing, and then there's usually about, depending on the slope. It's another benefit to this is that we get density, because if we have a big open field, we have to have about 17 feet between the panels, otherwise they'll shade themselves. When you go on a slope, just like a roof, you see panels on a roof, they're all nice and close to each other, right? So this is like an artificial roof. We would otherwise be probably a lot more land if this was a flat piece of land. So there's a better, but what you're seeing, I'm guessing, is probably very similar.
It's like 3 long rows.
You got it, yeah, we'll have obviously more than 3, but they will be in sections, and then there will be, I think we designed to about 10 or 12 feet between. That then allows, if somebody's doing some operations and maintenance and got hurt, fire, get out there and get out in between if they have a, altering vehicle, to get out to somebody they could, or they could come around the road. So there's multiple reasons why we do that.
Any other questions of the board? Members of the public? We'll close the public hearing. Any comments or questions from the board before we move to the questions? Good job. Thank you. All right, we'll jump right into the questions. Could the variance be granted without being contrary to the public interest? I'm gonna pick on Wayne.
Yes.
Brian.
Based on testimony given, it would be contrary to public interest if we deny it.
All right, Ann.
Yes.
Okay, I will concur, primarily because I don't see any gain to the public if we said no to this. Quite frankly, I think this could have a lot of public interest, positive public interest in the project, but I don't see anything that would be gained if we said no. Would the spirit of the ordinance be observed if the variance were granted? Brian?
Well, this is a confusing one because our ordinance, I'm sure solar was just left out because it just wasn't contemplated at the time. It just wasn't a thing. So, yeah.
Okay. Just quickly looking down through some of the uses that aren't necessarily permitted, and it's really as we had said, as the applicant stated, and as Sarah confirmed, it's not on the list. It's not prohibited by our ordinance. It's just not contemplated by our ordinance. So you're a yes, Brian. Wayne?
Yes, for the same reasons. It's greenhouse.
Right.
Do that. We could put a communal home in.
Yeah. Ann?
But makes me think we could do solar cremations. That would be possible. No, there's very little difference between greenhouse and it just depends on your application. Your plants are collecting your solar power. So that's a yes.
Yeah, and I'll concur, when we talk about our business district in our ordinance, it says the intent of this district is to provide for the development of commercial, retail, office, and similar uses oriented for serving the needs of the community. Yeah, so would granting the variance do substantial justice, Ian?
Well, and like Brian likes to talk about, for whom, but.
Right,
But yeah, it would it's certainly for the landowner as well as the community, so. Yes.
Well, Brian?
Yeah, as I like to talk about for whom, I think that one of my reservations is that once power goes into the grid, the grid is far reaching, way beyond Swansea, up into Canada and far west. We don't own the lines, we don't own the grid, we don't own anything.
Yeah.
We don't control it once we dump into it, so that's a concern, but I think in theory, and based on testimony given, it would do justice.
Okay, I concur. Could the variance be granted without diminishing surrounding property value? What's that? Oh, I'm sorry, Wayne.
Good answer.
Oh, geez, I hate it when that happens.
Yes, yeah. Solar panels are a quiet neighbor.
Okay, thank you. Substantial justice, and I concur, sorry, Wayne. Well, we'll see you right up first, Wayne. Could the variance be granted without diminishing surrounding property values?
Yes, yes. Let's say reasons.
Sure, right?
No evidence to the contrary, so yes.
That's true. Ian?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll concur too. We don't have a bevy of abutters here that are worried about their property values going down. There's no one here, so I agree. There's no evidence. So, do special conditions of the property exist that distinguish it from other properties in the area? And
Yes, indeed. They've demonstrated the slope and the property itself is unique in that it is able to support their solar panels without significant expense in engineering and they're able to make the best use of the property.
well stated. Brian?
I concur.
All right. Wayne?
Yes.
Thank you. I as well. Well, due to this special condition of the property distinguishing it from other properties in the area, do we agree that there's not a fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance? Remember, it's just not stated, it's not prohibitive, that our ordinance, and the specific application of the provision to the property. Wayne?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'll concur. This is a business use, but it's not likely that any business likely is without a significant expense gonna be, they can't even zip line up there because they took the trees down. So, I mean, there's not many businesses that are gonna work up here.
That was the only one that stuck out at me as recreational facility.
Yeah.
Business.
Okay. Thank you. And finally is, well, close to finally, is the proposed use a reasonable one? Brian?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Wayne?
Yes.
I concur. It's a farming, as far as I see, again and again. So we need not go to B. We've answered all the questions, 100% of the affirmative. I'll entertain a motion on this application.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept ZBA 22-009.
We have a second? Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Ann. Any questions on the motion? All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
No.
Aye. You say aye?
Yes.
Okay, good. I thought there was an extra syllable in there. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation.
I'd like to make another motion.
Yes?
It being after 9 o'clock, I'd like to hear the next special exception application.
Oh, thank you very much.
ZBA 22-010.
Thank you very much. I think what Ann is saying here is that we generally will make a decision at this point around 9 o'clock, whether we're going to move into any free, after a couple of hours of doing this, you get a little punchy. But what Ann is saying, and I concur, and we'll move forward with your application despite the hour, unless you don't feel it. Well, no, I don't think.
Point of order before you start, if you don't mind, full disclosure. I'm friends with the Cashman.
Yeah.
Okay, well, acquaintances. Okay. Okay, well, I know they can,
Are you getting paid by them?
Right,
so I don't feel it is a conflict of interest, but if you do, I don't mind stepping aside, keeping in mind if I step aside, you need to have all three say yes.
I fully trust your integrity, so.
Okay.
oh geez, that's rare. I've never heard that with regard to Brian.
I commend you guys for, I mean, I think the previous two cases is gonna be positive impact on the community.
Thank you.
Just moving that septic across the road, because like I think you said, you don't know what's in the ground.
You don't know
It could
what's
be
in the ground.
seeping into the lake for years, and so I think it's positive, so. but
Thank you.
My name is Tom Cashman, this is my wife Michelle, and we are applying for a special exception. Right?
Yes,
At 29 Swansea Lake Road, which we do not own. It's owned by my daughter, Kimberly Ivy, and my son-in-law, Michael Ivy Jr. We were residents at the property. For 20 years, we built the property back in 2001. And we were residents there up until, I would say, May. We just recently sold it. Being in the landscape business for almost 20 years in this community, we've watched numbers of seniors struggle with staying in their homes as they got older. And it really burdened our hearts as to what to think about, as much as all of us try to put away for retirement, how could we handle it? And we became aware of this opportunity for a DADU to build a property on a property. At the same time, my daughter and her son-in-law came back when I had heart surgery in 18 to Boston and began looking to relocate the area, but we're not able to financially afford it. This opportunity that we had was to be able to allow them to buy it at a very generous rate, with the option that we might be able to build a DADU on the property and retire there. The property itself is a very large property in respect to the area. It's a 5.6268 property. The site, the lot and the site, excuse me, my glasses, but it's tax map 31 lot 25. The driveway sits about 650 feet back from the road. It's very secluded with trees around. In the winter time, yes, you can see with the leaves off, you can see some neighbors, but during the full foliage, there's real no house visible from my neighbors. What we're proposing to build, I think you guys see the documents that we supply, is we want to build about an 850 square foot home. 1 story, we call it a 2-bedroom, it's going to be a 1-bedroom with a grandkid room, to be able to live on the property. We've already, prior to coming to this step, we explored and have talked with a septic designer to see if this is tangible on the property, which it is. There is a design in place that if we're approved and we can move forward, we would move forward with applying to the state. We obviously don't want to put the cart before the horse, and we want to make sure that we're in good standing with everything that we're going to do. The house would be on its own utilities. It would be on its own septic. It would be sharing a well. I contacted Cushing and Sons to find out what the best option to go, whether to put a secondary pump in the well or to drill a second well on the property. And they recommended actually coming off the main home from the pressure tank. They said that it's very common what they do with camp areas, and a lot of camping areas and many other places that have secondary homes. So that's the direction that we would like to go upon your approval. There's plenty of parking within the property. Like I said, the driveway is 650 feet long. It's literally 16 feet wide. As a landscaper, I was very, in my ways, like to have a nice wide driveway, so there's plenty of parking. The plan to build the house would be to match the existing landscape of the property. Is going to have I'm going to try to do with the identical pitch on the main dwelling. We sided very similar to the house. I don't know if I can match the exact color, faded over 20 years, but it's going to be along the same lines. So it'll blend right in. We do plan personally to put a little landscape buffer from us to our daughter to give them their own privacy as well as our own privacy. We do not feel that this is going to impact as far as a community for traffic, because we've been living there for 20 plus years, and my daughter and my son-in-law have been living with us in the lower house, the lower part of our house. So the house is 1,392 square feet upstairs and about 1,000 downstairs. We're considerably downsizing from what we had. At the same time, they're looking to have a large family, so this is ideal for them. We feel that it'll be a positive impact in the community as far as that the house will be built, obviously the code, and it'll be a very, appearance wise, it'll be nice, so that
it would increase the values of the neighboring properties. As far as the care, anything, unique about it, it is a very large lot that has a large amount of property cleared, so that it will just kind of blend in with everything going. From right now, when I closed down my landscape business, I had a lot of, I call them outbuildings, where I stored equipment. I've been slowly tearing those down and cleaning it up, and what I will do is do have a shed that has wood lean-tos on each side. When I burn wood, those have been coming off, and the contractor will move that shed to another location, which will blend right in with the pole barn that's currently there. I mean, that's pretty much what we're looking to request the variance or the special exception to build that.
Can I say something?
Absolutely, sure. It's a public hearing.
Maybe, well, it's kind of like.
Yeah.
Supposed to be the other half. I was gonna speak because I don't like, actually, well, disappear, except for you, which is. But as far as the uniqueness of our property, the thing that, of course, we've lived in Swansea since we got married, and we love Swansea, so, we don't have any intentions of leaving our community. During this pandemic, it's very hard for people to actually afford their place. And I used to be friends with Amish people in Pennsylvania, and part of the plan is you take care of your family. And in today's day and age, sometimes it's easier to throw them in a nursing home, but I know that, with building this DADU, that I'll be taken care of. If anything happens to him, finally, because he's been sick so much, but I know that my daughter and my son-in-law would take care of us, take care of me. And it's a huge relief knowing that, I wouldn't want to live in, after doing the landscaping, it's like, I don't want a big house. I don't want to live in an apartment. I don't want to live in a condo. I don't want to, but we're looking at our house that we own thinking, I don't want to do the landscaping. I don't want to do the plowing. I don't, so it's like, I think it's a relief for all of us to go this route. And I think what sets our property apart is that we're in Swansea, which is a nice rural community where, we get this huge property, but you wouldn't even know how big it is unless you come down the driveway and turn, and then boom, we're there. So I think our property is unique in that aspect that there's a lot of land that was initially cleared that we didn't want from the beginning from our contractor when we built the house. But it's nice and wide open to build the DADU. There wouldn't be any clearing because it's already set. The driveway is already in, everything is there, and it would only really improve the value of the properties within the community. Even when the market value of houses come down, they might not like drop down where they once were, but even when they drop down, this property will rise above it and be more valuable for what is currently there.
Just so you know, too.
Well done.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well done.
Yeah, because, and I'll speak to some things later, but because you're asking for a special exception, all you heard tonight about what we're talking about, the uniqueness of the property is relative to a variance. So you yourself, the questions, we're not gonna ask that question here. We're gonna ask the, but I appreciate the effort.
You did very well.
Yeah.
It's something we struggle with ourselves in trying to figure out, well, do we need it, we don't need it.
Right.
But
What questions are we
you were-
asking?
you- Well spoken.
I appreciate it.
I'm glad you
Appreciate
spoke.
So
Thank you.
I'll let you guys go home once you're done.
that. Believe me, you're the applicant. You have the floor whenever you want it.
Absolutely.
This is a public hearing. I don't know if you have any questions or.
Well, so the taxes would go up, right?
Probably
Yeah.
potentially the value of the property would increase, that's a
Sure.
presumption, and then, there would be an additional.
We
Additional tax.
consulted, excuse me,
Oh, sorry.
we consulted an attorney prior to going down this road.
Sure.
Part of the agreement by selling the property for $1 well below market value was that our responsibility would be the utilities, the taxes on the DADU, and everything there.
Sure.
And that way it would not be a burden to them. And I think at, some point when we're past and gone, then they have something, whether they're looking, their kids are grown and they're looking to downsize, or, it potentially could be a rental. I mean, I don't see that, but I can't say what will happen when we're gone.
Sure.
I think it would, it's definitely something that's positive for them as well. And my wife and I with our daughter, we're very close. We still do quite a bit together. So some families, this might not be a good working relationship, but with us, it's a lot different. When I'd had a heart valve that had to be repaired, and my daughter and my son-in-law came right back. And at the time I had a landscape business, we were taking care of our commercial properties. And he just jumped right in, said, what can I do? He took over and he drove my truck through the winter because I couldn't do anything. And, that's just the closest. We would drive down 2 hours to spend a Sunday afternoon with them, things like that. So,
Right.
from that aspect, I think it's going to be a positive for our family through that.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board?
The only question I have, and we've had a number of DADU and attached dwelling unit applications, and they're all for this excellent reason, which is where families can stay together and support each other as they grow older in place. And it's one thing I would ask, or just to consider, assuming that this moves forward, I would talk to whoever helped you with the designs to have one of the bathrooms be ADA compliant, so that you can maybe even consider a walk-in shower.
We already have with a seat.
Well,
we're looking for that. Because it's going to happen.
I'm throwing that out there. My husband has some physical problems, and as we get older, we want to be able to have that. It's just that sort of situation where you can take care of those needs easier.
And that's exactly what we looked at, because my wife makes it seem like I'm sick as a dog.
No.
I have a genetic valve that had to be repaired, but I played sports for close to 50 years, and I'm paying for it now.
Yeah.
Knee surgery a couple of weeks ago, things like that. But but time plays on our body, and we understand that.
Sure.
And so, the design, we've already, been through this for a while of a walk-in shower to be able to have a seat, because that's sometimes that happens, and we have to plan for it.
I just put, just don't go small when you're allowed 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
Don't go small, just because, so.
Thank you.
I did want to address the taxes.
Yes.
Because part of the balance in when we had this formula that we sold our house to, went to a lawyer, and so if they want to sell the house, we get to buy it back in the same formula. So it's all through our attorney, and
sure.
But part of it, selling the house, we didn't want to, with this market being like so we're inflated. We didn't want to really cause any problems with our neighbors. We're okay, you're selling your house lower. Realistically, we kind of sold the house at what our assessed value is, knowing that, okay, what's going to happen in the next 5 years, and when things kind of level out. So even though taxes will go up, you build a structure, it will go up. It's not like we sold it $100,000 more than what we could have and jacked the taxes up already. So it's kind of like this.
And the taxes won't necessarily go up. The valuation may change.
True.
So
We're tearing stuff down.
Instead of $35 or 1,000 or whatever, it might just go down. So I don't know.
So try to be respectful to our neighbors and not, making things crazy, but also to our daughter that, it's just, I think it's hard for people to live and survive, and we're seeing it everywhere. And kids are coming home because they can't afford it on their own and would rather move out before anyone else comes back home. So, and the 2-bedroom really is, as you get older, if you have to have a visiting nurse or someone staying overnight, there's a room. Right now, we're thinking grandchildren, who knows what's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years. And I plan on living, until like 95.
All right. Anything else to add for us? Any other questions of the board before we? All right, we'll close the public hearing. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments before we move to the questions? No, we'll jump on them. That's good. All right. Is the proposed use residential similar to one or more uses already authorized in the district, and is it in an appropriate location for such a use? Wayne?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
And I concur. Would this approval, such approval, should it be given, do we agree it would not reduce the value of any property within the district, nor otherwise be injurious, obnoxious, or offensive to the neighborhood? Ann,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Wayne,
Yes.
and I concur. Do we agree that there will be no nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians? Brian,
Yes.
Ann,
Yes.
Wayne,
Yes.
myself as well. We agree that adequate and appropriate facilities will be provided for the proper operation of the proposed use. Wayne,
Yes, based on what was presented by the Cashmans. Yeah.
excellent. Brian,
I concur with Wayne.
Ann
I concur with mine.
as well, and I do as well. That's all we have to answer in this one. The list is shorter, a little simpler to get a special exception than a variance. So given the affirmative answers in the affirmative, I entertain a motion on this application.
I'll make a motion that we accept ZBA 22-01 special exception application at this time.
Pretty good at this, Brian.
Right.
Good at motions, yeah.
She took over Motion Mitchell's job.
Yeah.
She's doing
Hold
good.
on, Mr. Rutgers, you did vote even though you recused yourself, or you did not recuse yourself?
I did not recuse
You
myself.
did- Okay. so
I
what-
just stated that there was a potential conflict of interest to see if the Cashmans wanted me to recuse or if the board wanted me to, and they
Okay.
neither did, so I stayed.
Oh, okay, thank you. I just wanted that explained, thank you.
I've known him for 40 years. I didn't give me up.
Oh, well, there you go.
It's
Yeah.
a small town.
I
So-
don't know each other.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? I don't think I got a second.
Second.
Thank you, Brian. Moved and seconded to approve this special exception application. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. I have to tell you that I testified a number of times on the original ADU law in Concord because I saw it as an excellent way to add housing units to a community without a big public outlay. In a small way, but in an effective way. This is you are an excellent example. We haven't seen enough. I know Mike has been, Jasmine's been beating the drum on these. He's spoken at events about ADUs and the ADUs and the like, but I'm heartened to see this come out. Because
I love hearing you talk about it. I just love it.
because it was important to me 5-6 years ago when this came out. So I appreciate you're seeing it the way it was intended to be. Not just families per se, but certainly families in your explanation is heartening. But at the same time, if we could do 10 times as many as we're doing right now, we'd be doing something, but at least we're moving the bar a little bit. But this is exactly why we have larger lots in New Hampshire. We have opportunities for attached or detached. Generally, as we said, there's a family element to them. And even if there wasn't, it doesn't really matter, but that's a wonderful, wonderful addition to what this was intended to be. You know, when you testify in that's kind of something that doesn't come up because it's too soft. I can't say that this is going to help to engage families to stay together and support one another, but that's truly a development. So just personally, from having put the time and effort in years ago, to see Swansea take even more of a direct and active approach to this is just heartening. So
My concern was always that this, I think it's a great opportunity, you know, with the situation we're in.
your situation.
But
Yeah.
my concern's always been is that people will use it for profit. You know, all of a sudden, everybody start building one to rent and make money off of it. And then
Not everyone.
it's gonna kind of really, now, there's some elderly people that may need that for rent, and I
Sure,
understand.
sure,
that.
if we can
I think
increase
should be
that.
Consideration, but I don't want to see it abused, and I hope. it
Well,
doesn't, 'cause-
one unit at a time is going to be hard to abuse it. And if it adds to the housing stock in the general sense and half the people do it for the purposes that you've displayed and half do it just to make a few extra dollars to pay their taxes, we end up with more housing in the area at no governmental expense, no large housing development has to go in somewhere to add to the housing. You know, we get 20 units this way as opposed to 20 units in a new housing development, which is going to be better off. So I just like.
What would make it hard even better is right now we're staying in a camper, I go every week and dump it at the recycling center, right where we're gonna build. I'm sorry, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it does.
Wastewater treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And before we go to bed, my grandson yells out the window, "Good night, Grandma, Grandpa, see you in the morning." And he comes running down every morning because we give him muffins and stuff. And those are the things that just melts my heart.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Isn't your last name Cashman? Not Walton.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I'll
We got
say
the new
that,
Waltons.
I sensed and heard clearly the emotion in your testimony. And I think one of the best things the states did was the ADUs, and it wasn't just Amish people. I grew up by Bristol County in northern Maine, and families were, it wasn't just expected, it was like almost mandated. You pull back in the older generation.
Isn't it funny how guys are created, you're brought into the earth and take care of your parents.
I'll make
As
that
you're
decision.
leaving, your kids take care of you.
Right.
You know, it's
That's
kind
how
of.
it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
You know, that's the word of leaving home. You know, my parents will never leave their home because it's their place. Well, if you're already there, then you don't have to leave if someone's there that can take care of you. So-
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys.
All right. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you for waiting. I'm sure
Thank
that
you for
was.
taking
Oh,
us.
yeah, I was gonna say, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was very great.
Thank you, Sarah.
Watch out for
I
it.
know, I'll be next month, right?
If it's
Have a
okay
good
with the board here, I'm gonna make a sort of the chairman's decision to table our adopting fees discussion. It's been a little bit late. We've had 3,
I think in light of current inflation, we should escalate what I asked for by 10%.
triple them all. That's unofficial.
I have some.
In motion K, did you want to end the meeting?
Yeah, can we-
I don't.
We'll make,
Motion K,
Yes,
did you want to end the meeting?
oh,
I'm
yeah.
gonna make that motion and triple play tonight for them all.
We'll stay all night.
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
All right, second?
Want everybody to drive safe.
Second.
All right, no discussion on this motion, doesn't allow it. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Good work tonight, everybody.
Brian, I'm gonna let